Oh, that's a big one, bro.
Oh, he's got it. The good thing is, even though he's barely got it up.
Oh, that's nice. That is nice. Oh yeah.
He came up and he just went, wha-pow! Wha-pow!
Hey, what's up, guys? Ronnie Kelly with Captain Ron's Guide Service on beautiful Lake Palestine here. Just got done fishing an awesome episode with Billy Lawson out here, and so we're gonna do a Guides Network episode on jerkbait fishing. Now, it's the day before Christmas, Christmas Eve. We're out here. We had a pretty good day. We fished about a half day out here. Water's in the 50s, and that's prime time for jerkbait fishing. Those bass are sitting out on points, and they start to suspend, and the shad will tend to rise, especially when you got a day like today. It's bluebird sky, slick, calm. A jerkbait's a key bait. Now, there's 3 different types of jerkbaits, and we're going to kind of talk about all 3 of them. So what I've got right here is your standard jerkbait. This is just a 100 series jerkbait. This happens to be one by 6 Sense Baits. It's a Provoke 106, and this is just a translucent shad colored bait here. It's an awesome bait. This is kind of my go-to. Most of the time when I'm throwing a jerkbait, I'm throwing this particular jerkbait right here, and this is kind of a ghost shad color. It's a translucent color. Now, when I'm selecting color on my jerkbait, it's going to be according to water clarity, as is any other bait for that matter. This is kind of a translucent color, and the water that we're fishing, we're on the south end of Palestine, has a lot of visibility, and it just gives these bass a great profile. They're looking up and they come up and get it. This is a suspending jerkbait. Now, one of the most important things when you're throwing a suspending jerkbait is that when you twitch that bait and it goes down to its depth, the desired depth, or whatever depth you're fishing it at, is that it suspends nose down, tail up, just like this. If it's not doing that, if the jerkbait's rising or it's sitting like this, you can actually come in here. If you guys can see this right here, those are suspended dots. They're just basically, it's lead tape that you put on the nose of the jerkbait to allow it to sit down a little bit. The other style jerkbait that I throw a lot, especially when the fish are a lot deeper, maybe they're in brush piles or they're just relating to the bottom a lot more, but the shad's up above them, they're coming up to feed, is just a little bit different style of jerkbait. It's just a little bit deeper jerkbait. This particular jerkbait is a discontinued bait by 6 Sense, but I've caught a lot of fish on it. And it allows this jerkbait to get down to that 8 to 12 foot of water and then just kind of suspend. Same thing on this bait. If that bait's not suspending where you want it to, you're going to want to add some lead tape to the nose to get it to sit there. And the third style of jerkbait is just a floating jerkbait, and this actually is an old Rogue. This is kind of an older bait, and this bait's an old classic. I mean, this is one that most anglers, especially shallow water anglers, have in their tackle box. There's only a couple of these that are made still today, and this is a great shallow water bait, especially if you want to cover water. This isn't a bait that you're going to throw and jerk and suspend. This bait right here is going to tend to float. Now, you'll notice I've got suspended dots on here, and the only reason I've got those suspended dots on this floating jerkbait is because when this jerkbait was floating, it started floating head first, and I wanted it to kind of float up like this. That's the only reason. So let's talk about the rod and reel that I'm going to use. I tend to use the same rod and reel for all 3 jerkbaits. This is actually a Kistler rod. It's a 6.6 medium action rod. It's got a whole lot of parabolic bend in it. And the reason for that is most of the time when these fish are biting this bait, they're coming up and they're swiping at it. Whether it's to kill the bait and allow it to fall and them to get a little bit better grip, or whether there's multiple fish and they're really aggressive and they're coming up and they're swatting at it. They tend to get this bait on the outside of their mouth a lot, so you want a whole lot of bend. And the other thing is, a lot of these jerkbaits, especially the floating jerkbaits, they're just really light and they're hard to throw, especially accurate. So you got to have a rod with a lot of give, with a lot of parabolic bend. On the line, I'm throwing fluorocarbon line 100% of the time. Now, the line depth really matters. If I'm at Lake Fork in the early spring or late winter and those fish are suspended up in the trees, I might go to 15-pound line because I don't want to allow that fish to get me down in the trees, bury me up, and I can't do anything with them. Most of the time, I'm throwing 12-pound fluorocarbon line. This is Seagar InvizX, and it's a great line. It's got very little stretch. It kind of stays in the water column and allows that bait just to kind of hover there. And it's got a lot of sensitivity, which is a big deal, because a lot of times these strikes, especially in the colder water, they're really subtle. So you need to be able to feel that strike on that really parabolic rod. So the reel, I'm using a 8-5-1, and you know, any high-speed reel will work. If you got a 7-1 or 8-1, either one of those are great. You know, you just want to be able to take up some slack because you're twitching the bait, similar to walking the dog. You're going to twitch the bait. And you want to be able to take up any slack if those fish grab that bait and come at you, which in the video we did today, we actually had that happen. We had a fish come up and come at me, and it kind of outran me. And so taking up lines are a really big deal. Now, one thing that I do that's a little unique, and I think there's a lot of anglers that do this, is the knot that I tie. I don't tie a standard Palomar knot or any kind of a clinch knot or anything like that. I'm actually tying something called a loop knot. Now, there's a reason I'm tying a loop knot. I want this bait to have as much action as it possibly can in the water column. So when I'm twitching this bait and it's going through the water, it's going nose down, side to side, spinning around backwards. And so the more slack and the more room that it's got, the more action it has. And today, in our episode today, we are actually able to kind of capture some of that on camera and see how much action this loop knot gives it. And so I'm gonna briefly go over this knot. If you can't see on the video, which it's gonna be a little bit tough to, this 12-pound line, especially being fluorocarbon line, doesn't show up real well. You can go to any YouTube channel and just type in loop knot, and most of the time something will pop up, or just go to Google it and they'll have usually illustrated instructions. But I'll show you guys how I tie it, and it works really good. I've caught a lot of big fish at Lake Fork. There's been a lot of big fish caught over the years on a loop knot, and it's just a great knot for any kind of twitch bait. So you're gonna start by making an overhand knot. Okay, you're just gonna make an overhand knot and leave about a 6 to 8 inch tag line. Okay, and this is, again, all you see here is a loop with a long tag in. Okay, so we're gonna take this tag in and we're gonna go right through the nose of this bait. You're gonna notice that my split ring's gone. Now, that's not because I don't want a split ring, that's because this is essentially gonna become my split ring. And I will say this, on these 6 cents baits, especially the split ring, it's an oval split ring. I would take that thing off and stick in your tackle box, because that's a really good split ring to use for crankbaits or stuff like that. So I'm gonna go right through the eye without the split ring. Now, I'm gonna take my tag in and see my loop here, guys. You've got the lines twisted right here where your knot is. Now this side has nothing on it. So I'm basically gonna go through this. If you guys can see right here how I've gone through there now, I'm gonna do that about 5 to 7 times. You know, if I've got 15-pound test, I might only go 5. If I've got 10-pound test to get a little bit deeper, I might go 7 or 8 times. So I'm just gonna, for the video, I'm just gonna go through here a few times. And so now, if you will look at this, and I don't wanna give it too much, but you can see where I've wrapped that around there. Now, here's what we're gonna do from here. We're gonna keep our fingers in here, and I'm gonna actually use my mouth, so I'm not gonna talk for a second. I'm gonna grab this, I'm gonna pull this down. I want the loop of my knot to be about 1 inch long, and that's gonna give that bait about 1 inch to slide up and down. So I'm gonna grab this, would take my 2 fingers and slide my knot, this whole circle here is my knot. I'm gonna slide my knot closer to the eye. So that's all I'm gonna do right there. Now, you can see I've got my knot here. I'm gonna wet it right here, and I'm just gonna pull it tight, right there, bam. And I'm at about 1 inch right there. So there we are, I've cut my tag in, I've got a really big loop, and what that does is that allows that bait to move up and down that knot. And again, it's a subtlety, it's just something that's a little bit different, and it might set you apart from your competition on tournament day. So let's talk about some areas to throw a jerkbait. Now, let's start out from top to bottom. All right, so from top, we're gonna have our floating jerkbait. This is again is a rogue. I'm throwing a rogue around the shore, around the bank, creek bends, shallow creek bends, areas that the shad are up high, the bass are shallow. This isn't something I'm gonna go targeting suspended fish, or I'm gonna target deep fish with. All I'm gonna look for is backwater, you know, warming creek bends, stuff like that, especially areas that have a lot of shad in. Those top areas are really good for a floating jerkbait. My retrieve is going to vary on that, and we'll go over that shortly. Now, your standard jerkbait, like we fished today, this is something that's really good around points or brush piles or boat docks. You know, we're on the main lake of Lake Palestine down on the south end. There's a lot of rocky points, and you know, you're sitting out anywhere from 25 to 15 foot of water and you're throwing up shallow and, you know, 3 to 10 foot of water, you just want an area that's got room for that bait to suspend and those bass to come up. Now, one thing I will tell you, this particular bait right here can be fished in shallow points. We saw this on Lake Fork this year. Brandon Cobb came down here during the Bassmaster Elite Series and caught 100 pounds of bass, and a lot of which were on a jerkbait, fishing it during the shad spawn, up on shallow points. And so he did really well with that, and that's a great technique. But I'm looking for points that have got fish suspended on them, or points that have got fish sitting right on the ends of them. And I'm also looking at boat docks. You know, especially in the wintertime, bass will suspend around boat docks. Provides a lot of cover, provides a lot of heat in the pillars of the boat dock, and that's a great way to target those bass. Now, the deeper style jerkbait, for me out here in East Texas, I'm throwing this primarily around deep brush. If I've got a brush pile of 20, 25, 30 foot of water and I see that those bass are sitting over the top of that, you know, a lot of times these bass will sit around brush piles because there's crappie, and obviously the crappie are around there because there's bait, and so the bass are kind of all together in the same deal. You know, bridge columns are a great area to throw these deeper jerk baits, and I'll throw them areas like that. And again, that's something that you're going to want to get that bait down to that particular piece of cover and then start to work it. And I'll go over that when we talk about how to work this bait. One of the most important thing about throwing a suspended jerk bait especially is that the colder the water, the more you allow it to sit. So I'm gonna demonstrate exactly how I'm gonna cast this bait, and I'm gonna show you my retrieve for cold sub 50 degree water. Okay, so I'm gonna make a cast right to my point. Now what I'm gonna do, especially if I'm offshore a little bit and I'm trying to get that bait down, first thing I do, I'm gonna click my handle in, I'm gonna drop my rod tip, and I'm gonna make 3 or 4 cranks, just like this. That's gonna allow that bait to kind of get down a few feet. Now it's sitting there, and it's hopefully, if my bait is tuned in, which has to do with those suspended dots, and most of the time these 6 cents provoke, like which I have on the 106, it's gonna kind of sit just the way it should. So hopefully my bait's just sitting there in the water column sideways, just like this, suspended. Now I want a lot of slack in my line, which is similar to when I'm walking the dog. I want to keep a lot of slack in my line and allow this bait to move and allow this bait to twitch and not pull the bait. So I'm gonna put my rod tip down, point back at my rod tip without taking up any slack, and pop the slack. And you'll notice it when I twitch that rod, I'm gonna start pointing at my bait, I'm gonna go down and back up. Pop, 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 just like that. All meanwhile picking up what little slack I do with my reel handle. So I want to leave a ample amount of slack in there, and I'm twitching that slack just like that. And I want, when my bait stops and it suspends, I want that little loop of line sitting right there, so that bait's actually suspending and it's not pulling. So my retrieve is going to go twitch, twitch, pause. Now this could be 2 seconds or this could be 6 seconds. This is all going to depend on the fish and the water temperature. Twitch, 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 pause. All I'm doing is an erratic action. I don't have a cadence that I stick with. So again, on the standard 100 series suspending jerkbait, it's going to be a twitch, twitch, pause, twitch, twitch, twitch. All we're doing is mimicking a bait fish. Now, when I'm throwing the floating jerkbait, it's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to make a cast, and I'm just going to twitch, twitch, twitch. It's going to be similar to this right here. Same concept. I want to kick that line, that slack back up in my line. But I'm just going to keep a steady retrieve, because as that bait pauses down, it's floating back up, and it's just doing this. And we're looking for more of a reaction strike on that. So when we're talking about the deeper diving jerkbaits, now on this particular technique, I'm looking for something a little bit deeper offshore. So I'm going to switch over to this side of the boat, and I'm going to throw out the other side of the boat, the deeper side of the boat. So I'm going to make a long cast past my target. So if my brush pile is 40 or 50 foot from my boat, I'm going to throw way past it and reel down to it. So I'm going to make a long cast. Same thing as earlier on the regular suspending jerkbait. I'm going to put my rod tip down, but I'm going to reel a little bit further. Now that bait hopefully is down there, and I'm going to start my retrieve. It's going to be pop, pop, pop. We're going to let it pause. Again, the pause depends on the water temperature, and a lot of times depends on the fish. A lot of times when that bait's just sitting there, those bass will come up, they'll grab it, and you'll just feel them take it away. So pop, 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 pop. And if you guys will notice, I think the most important thing about jerkbait fishing is when you pull that line, when you twitch that slack, and you point that rod back, that you have an ample amount of slack in that rod tip to where when that suspended jerkbait twitches around, that you don't pull that rod up and pull that bait up into the water column. You want that bait to sit just as still as it can, and those bass will come up and get it. And so those are the three different jerk baits that I'm going to throw, and those are the different retrieves. Hopefully this is something that'll help you guys at your lake. You know, talking about water clarity, it's a big deal. You know, the clearer the water, the more translucent the bait. The dirtier the water, maybe the more color you want in the bait. Billy today actually threw a red with a gold side jerk bait, and it did really well this morning until he broke it. So hope this helps you guys catch some fish. Hope it helps you catch some big fish. I think during the colder months of the year, jerkbait's one of the best way to target big suspended bass, especially on those calm, sunny days when it gets tough. Well, hey guys, that's it for this episode of the Guides Network. Hope to see you guys on the lake sometime. If you do, stop by and say hi. Otherwise, drop something in the comments if you've got any questions. Hit like and subscribe. And thanks for watching your Lake Fork Guide.